Hello everyone, welcome to my overview of my final project for my CPSC4180 class. What I've been doing is I've been doing an analysis of crime and police data, and it's pretty much an analysis of John M's Kaggle dataset and Chattanooga's open data to kind of see like the trends among, gender, racial groups, and just the armed, unarmed statuses of people involved in this. And so overall, I went ahead and just pretty much cleaned up the data. I went ahead and made some methods of subset, and we'll do some running figures here in a second. But overall, the trends show that white Americans have higher occurrences than any other racial group in terms of being the victim of police brutality. But in some instances, and we'll take a look at those later, it shows that there are some states where one racial group is higher than the other one. We'll take a look at that one. And it also shows that armed individuals take up a higher majority in the data set compared to others. And so pretty much the data sources and tools I've used, the first one's going to be John M's Police Violence and Racial Equity Dataset. And let's take a look at that real quick. It's going to be this guy right here, kaggle.com. I've got the link to it right there. And it's pretty much data sets that are pretty much broken down. The main one we're looking at and the main one we use was this one right here, the Police Killings MPV. And it's broken down by the name, age, gender, just general information about the person. And that's one of the ones that we're going to be using. The next one we're going to be using is the Chattanooga police data. This is Chattanooga's open police data that you can find on the website, included in the link right here in the footnote. And you'll be able to kind of see the one we're using is going to be the arrest data. So it's going to be like people who've been arrested, like, their name, gender, stuff about them. And the last tool I used, as you can see right here, it's going to be Jupyter Notebooks and Python 3 for all the analysis. And so for the introductory methods, one of the first things I wanted to do was go ahead and read and clean the data. That way we'll be able to pretty much subset and be able to filter by these values so we can just see the general trends. So let's do some running code here. So we want to make sure we're in the correct. Okay, so we want to make sure we're going to read in the file. We'll print out here and make sure everything read. And the mention right here, the actual reading and cleaning of the data, using the filtering methods, it's all done using these ones right here, the return average ages, filtered by gender, filtered by weapon status, filtered by race, and others too. And I've got two sets here, two sets of functions. One of them is going to be which if we want to look at specific locations. So if we want to look at a state, for example, or a city, we'll use this one. Whenever it has the SORC, that's going to mean is it a state or a city? And then I've got another one to kind of just show the overall occurrences. And that's what this cell right here does. We'll go ahead and run him, make sure he works. And that's good, no errors there. And I'll show you the running code once we get down. And so the next thing, there were a lot of missing values and unknown fields in here. There are a lot of ways to go about this, some of which what you can do is you can approximate them. But for ours, a lot of the occurrences of the missing values was in things like gender and the race ones we couldn't really guess. So I left them in there, and I've actually included them in the figures to kind of show the overall occurrences them. Okay, so let's take a look and we'll see what happens here. Alrighty, so the first one we're going to look at is among racial groups. So let me scroll down here. Let me get you the running code here. So this one's cell 7 right here. What this one right here does is it reads the file, and then it uses two of the functions we created earlier. Let me scroll up and show you. It's going to be these pie chart functions right here that create these little pie charts right here for us. So let's run you. We'll scroll down. It's not the one we want, it's this one right here. We'll run you, make sure you still work. And the one we're going to be looking at right here is the race ratio for all police data. And it pretty much shows that white Americans take up the majority with 45.63%. Actually, let me get a better look here. Oh. Where? Oh, here it is. This is the one I want to use. So let's go back. Let me zoom in a little bit. So as we can see here, white Americans take up 45.63% of all the occurrences in here, with African Americans being at 26.08, and the other individuals here. And like I was just mentioning about those unknown values, I still included them in the analysis because it really shows just how much they take up of the data set. And so what I was looking at too is this 45%, like that's not a giant majority, but it's still a good amount. So I went ahead and looked in here and seen like, is this true for every city, or is it like specific by specific state example? And we actually found that it is kind of like on a state by state basis, city by city basis. So as we can see here, the one for Tennessee that I've computed, and you can get it in cell 6 right here. This little function asks you if you want a state. We're going to do a state. We're going to do Tennessee. And then it's broken down, and as we can see, we've got about 63.96% white Americans take up for specifically in Tennessee for this data set. And as we can see, African Americans still have a lower number, but if we scroll down here on the next page here, we can see that we have other states here where the same is not true, where white Americans are actually higher. So let's recompute those, show you the running example. Nope, that's not what I wanted. We're going to do this by state, and we're going to do California. And as we can see here, Hispanic Americans actually take up the majority for California at 42.93%, with white Americans still being at a 29.51%. And now let's run it for New Mexico. Let's do state. Let's do New Mexico. As we can see in the computed figure right here, Hispanics take up 58% of number of occurrences just in the data set right here for New Mexico. It's also important to note that in both of these, white Americans still take up the second majority here, which that's why I was mentioning above here, like overall, like that 45% isn't too much. And with how it's not like too much, for example, there are some instances where some states have higher occurrences than the other. And so this one right here, this figure right here, pretty much shows us the numerical breakdown. See, with pie charts, we can get these overall percentages and they look nice, but I've included this bar chart right here. Let me run this. So I've got them here for New Mexico, California, and Tennessee. It breaks it down by numerical, so we can actually see just overall numbers. And I've also included this in the report, but it's interesting to see whenever you're doing analysis like this, not to use pie charts and other things all the time, because you want to see just a number of occurrences. And so as we can see right here, New Mexico, I calculated, only has 150 instances, while California has 1,230 of them, and Tennessee has 197. So you can kind of see the breakdown here, rather than getting like the pie chart view right here. We can kind of see the actual numbers between the two. Alrighty, for the Chattanooga analysis, I've broken this report down by, pretty much breaking it down by racial groups, gender, and armed status. And each of them also has kind of like their Chattanooga counterparts. Now the Chattanooga counterparts, the data set I was using right here, in the Jupyter notebook right here, this one right here is going to pretty much let us read it. And it's similar, but this one's for arrest charges rather than police brutality and citizens who have been killed by police. So as we can see here, we have similar ones that we use to filter and pretty much subset based on specific values. So gender, race, statute. And then we have similar pie charts right here that pretty much do the same. We'll run those. And then we'll run this cell right here that gives us the overall occurrences for this specific arrest charges. As we can see here, it's pretty interesting to note here that African Americans take up 52.50% of all occurrences, while white Americans take up 46.97%. And so I really did go and look in the data set, and it really does show that it's only broken down by like white Americans and African Americans, and this other 0.53%, it may be Hispanics, it may be, other racial groups that just weren't included in this data set. It's really interesting to show that There really wasn't any others rather than African Americans and white Americans in here. And so I've included that in the report too. And so now let's take a look at gender really quick. So let me scroll. Oop. And it's using the same cell as above for the whole police data. As we can see for the gender ratio, it does show that males do have a higher number of occurrences than females, taking up 94.99% and 5.01% respectively. And so whenever I saw this number, I was like, okay, I believe this is going to be, the trend across other states. So I went ahead and used the same ones as above, the California and Tennessee right here, and it does show pretty much for all states that I pick out that it does show that males do have a higher number of females for these specific occurrences in the police killing data set. And so it's pretty much going to be the same situation for the Chattanooga analysis. Let me scroll back down here. As we can see right here, it does show that males do indeed have a higher number of occurrences even for Chattanooga arrests than females. And so the difference between this one, the trends among the race and trends among the gender, it shows that on race there are certain instances like California, New Mexico here, where Hispanic Americans have a higher number of occurrences, but on the other hand, it does not show in the gender where there are specific examples where females outweigh the males. And it's going to be the same situation for gender on the Chattanooga, taking up 72.68%. Now, one of the last ones I looked at was trends among the weapons status. So, in recent days, there have been movements for police violence and police reform due to a number of unarmed police brutality and occurrences. And so I went ahead and included this to kind of see like how it's broken down to see if that is really true. So let me scroll up here. Where was I? Let's get the running code example. Oh, here it is. So we'll run you, and we get the figure right here, and it shows that armed instances take up 77.79% of all instances here in this police data, which means that over 77% of occurrences had an armed conflict. And so it's really still interesting to see here that unarmed is it's not it's not a large number, but it's certainly enough in respect to the others here. Like it takes up about 15% of the data set. And then it's the same for California, New Mexico, and Tennessee, how it's roughly hovering between 10 to 15% on average for each data set. It shows overall for the unarmed as well. And so overall conclusions and closing remarks, it shows that whenever we break this down into things like gender, racial groups, and armed status, it shows that for gender, it does show that males do have a higher number of occurrences than females to be the victim of police brutality for this specific data set. And we also went ahead and looked and seen just our other states, cities, like, is this the same trend there? And we did find that that was true for ones such as California, New Mexico, and Tennessee. It's all the same. Males do have a higher number of occurrences than females in here, so we can pretty much conclude that, at least for this data set, that males do have a higher number of occurrences and just overall chance to be the victim of police brutality. And so for armed and unarmed, we just looked at that one. It's a similar situation to the gender. Armed takes up a higher number of occurrences, and we also went ahead and looked at it for specific state by state basis, and there doesn't look like there's any examples where unarmed outweigh the number of armed. That's good, but it also is important to see that the unarmed is hovering between that 10 to 15% I was just mentioning earlier. And so the same situation with the gender, we can pretty much conclude that yes, if you are armed, there is a decent chance that you would be the victim of police brutality. And so lastly, we've got it broken down by race, and this one was a little bit interesting. One is it wasn't really cut and clear like the gender or the armed status. We kind of had to take a deeper look to kind of see the trend. but it does show, at least in the numbers here, that white Americans have a higher occurrence and just overall trend to be the victim of police brutality, making up a total of 45.63% of all instances in the police killing data set. Now, on the other hand, this is where I was just mentioning we had to dig a little deeper. In the Chattanooga one we were looking at, remember this is the arrest charges. African Americans actually take up a higher number of majority, making up 52.50%, while white Americans have a 46.97%. And so the overall trend that white Americans are more dominant in this is not true for examples such as California here, New Mexico, and Tennessee, or actually, sorry, not Tennessee, but yeah, California, New Mexico, it does show that there is another group that has higher occurrences. But for overall trends, I concluded for this one that it does seem like white Americans have a higher occurrence, at least in this data set. And so, closing remarks, one of the things I did put in the report, and I kind of do just want to mention, that this analysis really isn't the overall trends like as the United States, like, overall, rather it's just for this specific data set and the instances in this data set. Right, and it can serve as kind of like a good baseline for going forward if I'm going to be looking at other instances so I can reference these code and just kind of see like what's going on here. But it's not showing the overall trend, rather it's kind of just taking a look at these files here. Let me show you them real quick, just so we can kind of look. The main one right here is the police killings MPV file. This one isn't the overall encompassing number of deaths. This one only has about 8,000 entries in it, but it's still important to look at these and just kind of see the overall trends. So this one's the police killings MPV. It's one of the main ones we've looked at. And like I was just mentioning, like, breaking it down by race, all these unknown values here, breaking it down by state. And the other one we were looking at was I think it was, yep, this one, CPD arrest charges. Similar situation, it was broken down by statute description, the charges, where it occurred, whether they were male or female. Like I was just mentioning, it is true that in this data set that there are only white Americans and African Americans in this data set compared to any others. And sometimes we have occurrences of like others, but it's just African Americans to white Americans here. And so that is the overall just trends that I found in this data. It was really interesting working on this project and just kind of getting my hands dirty, looking at some data, using my own methods, and just kind of making some own visualizations and just kind of seeing some trends here. And so if you want to, if you check in the description, you can check out my GitHub where you can download the Jupyter Notebook and you can download the report and the data sets as well. And you can go ahead and just take a look at it as well and just kind of see if you find anything that I've missed. If you did find something that I've missed, I would love to hear it. Just go ahead and submit it to me. Alrighty, thank you guys so much.